Join CBC News for the Canadian perspective on the Republican National Convention. Starting July 15th, delegates will formally choose Donald Trump and his running mate for the White House.
I profoundly accept.
Watch complete coverage on CBC, plus a CBC News special hosted by Adrian Arsenault with Katie Simpson and Paul Hunter on July 17th and 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern on CBC News Network, digital and streaming platforms. Republican National Convention. Coverage starts July 15th on CBC.
You know the feeling of finding a really good podcast? Or the feeling of someone always being there, like your favorite radio show? Stream CBC Podcasts, CBC Music, and CBC Radio anytime, anywhere. Download the CBC Listen app.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Josh Crabb in Winnipeg. At noon, it's partly cloudy and 18 downtown, 19 and mostly cloudy in Brandon, mainly sunny, and 15 in Thompson. The biggest cannabis player in Manitoba is going through some hard times. Delta 9 says it has obtained an initial order for creditor protection, and now a different company will acquire its retail stores. CBC's Ian Fraze reports.
Delta 9 has long been a business success story in Winnipeg. It began as a medical cannabis retailer, and when recreational cannabis became legal, Delta 9 was ready. It became a producer and a retailer, eventually opening more than a dozen stores. But all of that is now in jeopardy. Delta 9 has received an initial order for creditor protection. The company says this is in its best interest. Delta 9 reportedly owes one creditor $40 million. The company has also reached an agreement with another cannabis retailer, the FICA company, to buy part of the business. FICA owns more than 140 stores across Canada. Ian Fraze, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Inflation dropped in Canada last month. The latest numbers show the cost of living went up more slowly in June than the month before. And that is welcome news for the Bank of Canada and Canadians waiting for lower interest rates. Anis Hadaouri reports.
2.7%. That's what inflation fell to in June, while Statistics Canada pins most of the drop on gasoline prices increasing far more slowly. Economists point out that core inflation, the numbers that leave out volatile things such as energy, those are easing downward a bit too.
So the data was good from the Bank of Canada's perspective.
Catherine Judge is a senior economist at CIBC Capital Markets in Toronto.
Really, when you look at those measures, there's no reason not to cut interest rates. Economic growth is very weak.
She points out there are other indicators also showing the economy is cooling off, and the central bank will take that into account.
You've seen a significant increase in the unemployment rate. Spending intentions data is weak. And then, of course, we have population growth slowing, which will be a hit to demand as well.
The next interest rate decision is a week from Wednesday. Anis Hadaouri, CBC News, Calgary.
In Manitoba, inflation edged slightly higher to 1.4% from 1.3%. Manitoba and Saskatchewan both now boast the lowest inflation in Canada. Wisconsin will be a battleground state in November's U.S. presidential election, but today it is Republican territory.
Are you ready for 4 more years of Donald Trump? Oh, me too. Listen.
More than 50,000 people in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. A bandaged Donald Trump took the stage last night, his first public appearance since a gunman took aim at him on Saturday. The CBC's Ithel Musa is covering the convention in Milwaukee.
There were 2 big reveals that kicked off day one. The first is Trump's announcement of his vice presidential nominee, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who went from being a self-described never-Trumper in 2016 to Trump's 2024 running mate. Vance is a staunch conservative from Ohio, and at 39, the former venture capitalist represents a younger generation. The other big reveal last night is, of course, Donald Trump's appearance. He looked triumphant as he arrived at the arena with a bandage over his right ear. Here's South Carolina Senator Tim Scott.
Saturday, the devil came to Pennsylvania holding a rifle, but an American lion got back up on his feet and he roared!
Trump will deliver his speech to delegates on Thursday. Ithel Musa, CBC News, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Anti-government protesters in Kenya are once again clashing with police. That's police firing tear gas as protesters burned tires in a town south of Nairobi. Last month, more than 30 people were killed as protesters demonstrated against a controversial finance bill. The bill was ultimately withdrawn, but protesters continue to call for the resignation of President William Ruto. 4 days after issuing an evacuation order, Labrador City has declared a state of emergency. It comes as the wildfire threatening the community remains just 4 kilometers from town. Here is Mayor Belinda Adams.
We are doing this to ensure safety and to seek additional support to maintain our essential services and to protect our asses. This is a very important announcement, and it's very serious for the town of Labrador City to make sure that we declare this state of emergency so we can get some extra support.
The province's fire duty officer expects to see hotspots developing for days. Thousands of residents were forced from their homes Friday evening. There is no word yet on when they'll be allowed to return. And finally, a new study suggests the melting of the polar ice caps is slowing the rotation of Earth. Scientists say the growing expanse of open water acts as a rotational drag, and by the next century, the average day could be more than 2 milliseconds longer. While it won't be noticeable here on the ground, in space it could be a problem. When it comes to space travel, even the slightest change in calculation can lead to significant navigational errors. And that is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 12:30.
Good afternoon, Manitoba. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on the CBC Listen app and on YouTube. I'm Corey Funk, in for Janet Stewart. Happy Tuesday. Well, coming up this hour on the show, weather. It's a talker. And lately, it seems there's been more rainy days than not. So what's the deal with this wet weather? And how has it impacted you? That's the topic of today's call-in conversation at 12:30. But this half hour on the show, we're going to take you to Thompson, where one local vet is feeling the bite of our province's rural vet shortage. But up first on the show, Carberry residents will get a chance tonight to weigh in on changes to the intersection of Highway 5 and the Trans-Canada Highway, where 17 people died in a bus crash last year. Manitoba's transport minister is with us here in studio to talk about it. Well, it was the deadliest bus crash in our province's history. And tonight at Carberry Community Memorial Hall, people will have a chance to discuss how to make the intersection where it happened safer. It's hosted by the province, and to talk more about the future of this intersection, we have Transportation and Infrastructure Minister Lisa Naylor with us here in studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So just to remind listeners, because it was back in January when you kind of proposed some of the changes here, I just want to kind of start from the beginning. You know, what is it about this intersection that's so dangerous in the first place?
Well, this intersection, like many other intersections along Highway 1, are, we know that traffic has to cross over without some of the cues that you might have in intersections where you might have, traffic lights or other kinds of indicators. And so there's lots of opportunity for driver error at an intersection like this. And so while it meets national safety standards, we think that the intersection can be made safer and prevent any type of head-on collisions like what we've seen. And so that's the work that we're doing now.
And I understand there's kind of three general options that you're weighing right now. Can you just remind us what those three options are?
Yeah, so the review that was done that we presented back in January, the Highway Safety Review, concluded that at this particular intersection, the three best options could be a roundabout, a widening of the median, or something called an R-cut. And an R-cut is unfamiliar to Manitobans, but it might not be, depending on how much traveling they've done. It's very common and popular in the U.S. There's 90 of them now just in the state of Minnesota. And Saskatchewan got the first R-cut last year. And for us, the R-cut stands for a reduced collision U-turn. There are different names for this type of intersection, but it's a way that we completely eliminate left-hand turns or people crossing directly across the highway.
And is there an option that you think makes the most sense at this point?
That this is an engineering decision. Also has to be done in consultation with community. All three of those options are considered from an engineering standpoint to be safe, to all be to be within the safe thresholds of what would be acceptable. But they all have benefits that are a little bit different than the others, and some people would perceive some negatives to some of them as well. So that's why we're going out to the community.
Like the R-cut, for example, trucking could be forcing all those U-turns could be inconvenient, right?
Yeah, surprisingly, the trucking industry has been a very big fan in Saskatchewan.
Oh, really? Okay.
If you're a truck driver who drives across North America, you're used to R-cuts. And right, they happen a lot in other places, but we consult with the trucking industry, we consult with the agriculture industry, we consult with the commuters and users of the highway, as well as the local community members. And our CMP.
Yeah, and have you heard any outstanding option from residents so far? Because these have been kind of out in the public for about since January. So
yeah, we've certainly had anecdotal responses to things, but I think it's important that folks go and hear the presentation, understand the benefits and the challenges for each option, get their questions answered on things like why not traffic lights or why not slowing down speed. Some of the questions that I had back in January, they're easy to answer, but if you haven't had the opportunity to ask those questions and to get your answers, it's good for people to show up and be a part of the experience. And from this process, then the engineers will be able to come forward with a more detailed design to hear from folks on the next step, which direction we're going to go in.
And tonight in particular, because this is actually happening, in the community that's close to this intersection, how much will tonight's conversation inform the province's final decision? You said it's ultimately an engineering decision, but how important is tonight in particular?
Oh, it's really important that community members have their say. This isn't the only opportunity. It's certainly, this is the first opportunity in this way. And as I said, there's individual and specific consultation with industry, such as trucking and agriculture. And then after tonight, as we move forward with refining the plan, there'll also be the opportunity on Engage MB there's usually a 45-day consultation that anyone from across Manitoba can weigh in, because of course this is a major highway used by Manitobans from all over.
And as of January at least, you've said the province has earmarked $12 million for this project. Is that still the budget? And is that all going to fall within it, do you think? I know lots has changed, and it can change in 6 months or so.
Yes, I believe that it will. The $12 million includes the functional design process, the consultation process attached to that, and then getting to the more detailed design. Usually there's a process of land acquisition. Whatever we make a change like this to an intersection, we need to acquire land. Sometimes we have to move hydro poles. So that's a budget that it should easily fall within that, but encompasses everything that needs to happen.
And now knowing what even with how R-cuts work or U-turns, anything like that, and the fact that, like you mentioned, there's a lot of intersections like these along the number one. What's the chances that other intersections, I know there's already kind of one that you're also looking at, Highway 12 and Provincial Road 210.
Right.
But it's somewhere else or southeast of Winnipeg here. But along number one, do you think this could be the first of many changes to many intersections along number one? Is that the hope? What do you see in the long term?
We're evaluating our entire highway network from a safety perspective. We part of our response to what happened at Highway 1 and 5 last year, the tragic collision, is that we have stood up a new safety unit within the department that is evaluating our entire network. And they're evaluating it through the lens of how people actually drive versus, the rules of the road, right? So we can have certain speed limits limits, we can put certain signs in certain places, but there is human error, and people make decisions, in terms of speed based on how everyone else is driving around them. And so through that lens, they're evaluating the whole network, and then that contributes to our decisions about which upgrades come next. And you mentioned the one that you mentioned at 210 and 12. There are also several options, and one of them includes it's a modified arc cut. It's a half arc cut kind of situation because it's different needs at that intersection.
Right. And if people want to come tonight, what do they need to know?
I believe they just need to arrive. I think it's at 6:30 at the Carberry Community Center.
Okay. And before that you go, just a reminder of the timeline of this project. When do you hope to have it all ready and finished?
I'm going to correct myself. It's the Carberry Memorial Hall.
Yes.
At
Okay,
6:30.
right.
So
Yes.
I don't want to confuse anyone. We expect the new intersection to be open in 2016. So there's a number of steps. 2026, and there's a number of steps between now and then. And so we've sped up the pace of this project in the way that we have this usual functional design process. Usually takes 6 to 9 months. We're coming out with it at about the 7-month mark, and the next step is about 69 months. So it depends a lot on the final decision and what the land acquisition process that can take a little while. But we anticipate the opening of the new intersection in sometime in 2026.
And what's the province been doing in the meantime to make that intersection safer?
Well, immediately after the collision, and of course, I wasn't in government at the time, but my understanding of right afterwards, the immediate, rumble strips were renewed. The signage was renewed. There's additional signage warning people as they approach the intersection to be aware that this is a significant intersection. So other factors to get people's attention.
Minister Naylor, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
You're very welcome.
That's Lisa Naylor. She is Manitoba's Transportation and Infrastructure Minister. The open house, just a reminder, runs tonight from 6:30 to 8 at the Carberry Community Memorial Hall. And if you live in the area or drive through that intersection of Highway 5 and Trans-Canada, often we want to hear from you. What do you want to see to make that intersection safer? Call our listener line 204-788-3797. That's 204-788-3797.
Your local news at your fingertips.
CBC News has a local news app made for your phone or tablet.
So don't waste time scrolling for the local stories you want. Just download the app to get the information that matters to you when it happens.
And how you want it.
Another way to get your local news. The CBC News app. Download it today.
You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. I'm Corey Funk, in for Janet Stewart. And still to come this half hour on the show, she would love to treat people's pets in Thompson, but the current vet shortage means she's sending a lot of animals down to Winnipeg. We're going to hear one veterinarian story coming up. But first, let's take a look at your weather conditions across the province right now. In Brandon, you are 18 degrees right now, mostly cloudy at the airport. Up in Churchill, 13 right now, partly cloudy as well. Dauphin, cloudy right now, 18 degrees. Flin Flon, 15 degrees right now, mostly cloudy. Gillam at the airport, 17. Gretna, you're a hot spot this afternoon. You are sitting at 20. Island Lake is our cold spot in the province right now, sitting at 11. McCreary, sunny, 16 degrees right now. Pinawa, into the east, 15 degrees, mostly cloudy. Sprague, 19 right now. To Dooley Lake, sunny, 17. Not the cold spot in the province for the first time in a while. The Pas, sunny, 15 degrees. Thompson at the airport, you're 17 degrees. Victoria Beach, 16. And Winnipeg at the Forks, 19 degrees, mostly cloudy. Well, finding medical care for your pet in rural Manitoba these days is tough, and the lack of veterinarians is largely to thank. Dr. Carrie Hudson-Rakedahl is seeing the impacts of the shortage firsthand. She's a veterinarian with North of 55 Clinic in Thompson, and she spoke with CBC's Janet Stewart.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
How would you describe the shortage of veterinarians in Manitoba right now, particularly rural Manitoba?
The shortage of veterinarians and veterinary professionals, RVTs as well, in Manitoba is quite serious. Most clinics throughout the province are looking rurally, well, cities. I mean, it's urban. It's an urban problem. It's a rural problem. It's a northern problem. Everybody is short, which is definitely affecting animal welfare, access to care. So it's a serious problem for sure.
You say it's affecting animal welfare. Do you have any stories you can share with us?
I mean, just from Thompson, for example, on a daily basis, we are having to refer people down to Winnipeg that may or may not be able to travel just because we are not able, as one veterinarian, I don't have any RVTs to assist me here. So for, serious issues like animals that are hit by cars, serious medical issues that need hospitalization, I just can't handle up here on my own. So literally on a daily basis, we're having to refer people down to Winnipeg, which is, an 8-hour drive and not always possible for everyone. So those animals are potentially not accessing care and could well be suffering. So
you actually made the move to Thompson because the situation there was so dire.
Yeah, that's right. So in early 2021, the clinic up here suddenly closed, and I was getting calls from clients that did not have access to care. I came up as a temporary solution, but realized that there was animals, a lot of animals that were suffering, a lot of animals that needed veterinary care. So I transitioned from a temporary clinic to a permanent clinic up here.
You left your family to do that. How are you doing?
It's pretty stressful being up here without my husband. My husband is a cattle farmer, so he's got 600 head of cattle that can't just make a move up to Thompson where there is 0 cattle. So being away from him is really difficult. The rest of my parents are getting older. They're in Saskatoon. They would not want me to say they're getting older, but it is true. So I don't get to see them very often either. So, it's hard being away from family. And definitely I want to get back to them as soon as I can, but we need veterinarians up here. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation.
You were recently given an award from the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association for your commitment to small animal care. What did that award mean to you?
Getting an award, definitely very humbling. It was also very nice to be appreciated, especially by my colleagues. I've really depended on my colleagues while I've been up here for their support, for their guidance. So having them recognize the sacrifices that I've made to be up here was overwhelming, humbling, and very much appreciated.
What's it going to take to get more people to enter the profession?
It's not a shortage of people interested in entering the profession. It's a shortage of spaces to train them. So the WCVM, where I went to school, is working hard to expand, but that takes millions of dollars to make those expansions. They are graduating the largest class they ever have I believe this year. So that's great. But their, infrastructure is needed. And then there's a shortage of people that are going into teaching institutions as well. So, if we're graduating more students, we need more teachers, we need more space. So it's not a lack of people wanting to be vets. It's a lack of infrastructure for the most part. And then there's the, moving to rural places, moving to northern communities, having access to everything. So hospitals, education for their kids, all the kind of medical necessities, necessities that we need just to live. Those are often lacking in rural communities and northern communities. So, there's got to be that infrastructure that people want to move to those places as well.
How long do you think you'll be able to keep your Thompson practice going?
I've been up here 3.5 years. There is a pet care community, the Thompson Pet Care Co-op, who is working to raise funds to buy the building, in which case what would happen is they would buy the building, I would continue to operate the clinic, and then they would get in locum vets. So I would work a week a month, and then locum vets would cover the other 3 weeks a month. That's the ideal situation, unless we can find a veterinarian who wants to move up to Thompson and take over. As far as how much longer, mental health-wise, I'm getting stretched pretty thin. So I keep on going because of the good clients that I have up here. And, we do have a lot of great clients, and the community is supportive, which is what's keeping me here for sure.
That's an issue we hear of from vets everywhere, even those who aren't faced with the extraordinary situation you've taken on, which is leaving your family. Compassion fatigue is a huge issue for vets. What can we as pet owners and people who deal with vets keep in mind to perhaps help the situation, or at least not make it worse?
Compassion fatigue is definitely something that affects our profession very much. Pet care is expensive, and so having realistic expectations of what pet care costs when you're getting an animal, calling ahead to find out what things cost is really important. Pet insurance can be very helpful, but just realizing when you go to a clinic and your pet is sick, knowing that, that does cost money. So having realistic expectations, the clinic can't provide care for free. It's not my responsibility as a clinic owner to pay for somebody else's pet. Pet care has advanced very much. Veterinary care has advanced very much in the last, I would say, even 10 years. What we can do for animals and what people expect from veterinarians has really changed from when I graduated 20 years ago. But with those changes also come costs. So I think being realistic and then being kind. I think just kindness and respect goes a long way in how you're dealing with your veterinary professionals. Having good conversations, being open to discussion, I think all of those things can make a big difference.
Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Dr. Carrie Hudson-Rakedahl is a veterinarian with North of 55 Clinic in Thompson. She was speaking with CBC's Janet Stewart.
Seeing the sun come up this morning, it somehow set me right. Like a big bright round reminder that I'm here and I'm alive. Tomorrow everything may change, but I've got it made today. I'm good to go, I got all I need. Shirt on my back and all the air I can breathe. No worries far as I can see. Things could always be a little bit better, but I'm doing better than a whole lot of folks I know. I'm low on trouble, high on hope. So answer someone else's prayers, Lord, if you would. 'Cause today I'm good. My old air conditioner's broken, but I don't mind the heat. Took a nap with the windows open and good to go. I got all I need, a shirt on my back and all the air I can breathe. No worries, far as I can see. Things could always be a little bit better, but I'm doing better than a whole lot of folks I know. I'm low on trouble, high on hope. So answer someone else's prayers, Lord, if you would. 'Cause today I'm good. Today I'm good. Even if it rains, let it fall off my back.
That's Kendra Kay with I'm Good. Still lots to come here on Radio Noon. Stay tuned. Our call-in conversation. How rainy has it been where you are? What are your rain stories? We're going to be joined by a meteorologist to talk about just how weird and wet this summer has been so far. We want to hear your rain stories. 204-780-0893. Our phone lines are opening up shortly. 204-780-0893. That conversation coming up after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Josh Crabb. An off-duty police officer who was at a grocery store yesterday afternoon helped in the arrest of a man wanted in a number of thefts. Around 5 p.m. at the grocery store in Grant Park Mall, a man became aggressive towards a security guard and started chasing him around the store. The off-duty officer intervened, arrested the suspect, and called for backup. When the suspect was turned over to police, they found a knife on him. A 40-year-old man faces numerous charges in connection to a number of incidents, including a pair of thefts from a grocery store in Osborne Village in June and another at a convenience store on Wellington Avenue in April. Winnipeg police are looking for information after a boy in his mid-teens was swarmed and robbed on Sunday. Police say the boy got off the bus at Selkirk and Andrews around 10 p.m. and began walking. A group of 6 to 10 teens also got off the bus and confronted him at Manitoba and Andrews. Police say they pushed him down and assaulted him while demanding he hand over his property. The suspects eventually left with some of his things and hopped onto another bus. The victim reported the assault to his parents, who then notified police. Saskatchewan has reached a temporary resolution with Ottawa over its carbon tax dispute. The Canada Revenue Agency billed the province for tens of millions of dollars for not collecting the tax on home heating. As Olivia Stefanovich reports, the province is gambling it won't have to pay anything at all.
Well, what we see is, a federal government that's trying to essentially go into our bank account and garnish some money, take money out of our bank account.
Speaking to reporters outside the Premier's meeting in Halifax, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe stood by his province's decision to fight Ottawa from taking at least $56 million in uncollected carbon tax payments.
What we would rather see is the removal of the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax on all items.
Moe didn't get that wish, but he is celebrating a temporary win in negotiations with the federal government. Going forward, the Saskatchewan government says it will establish a letter of credit, so the province won't have to pay anything, at least for now, until the Tax Court of Canada makes a final decision. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Halifax.
And finally, a major player in the cannabis sector is going through some hard times. Delta 9 says it has obtained an initial order for creditor protection. It started as a medical cannabis retailer, and then when recreational cannabis became legal, the company became a producer and a retailer, opening more than a dozen stores. The company reportedly owes one creditor $40 million. Delta 9 has reached an agreement with another cannabis retailer called FICA to buy part of the business. That is CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 1:30.
Josh, you're an avid cyclist, huh?
Yes.
We're about to have a conversation coming up about just how darn rainy it's been.
Mm-hmm.
How wet have you gotten lately on your bike rides?
I've been pretty lucky lately, but I have got soaked a few times, like leaving work.
Yeah.
There was no choice. But,
yeah. And did you prepare? Were you like, oh, shoot, I should have brought a
Yeah, I definitely had a raincoat and like a rain cover for my pannier.
Yeah.
So I'm always kind of prepared for it because you just never know this summer.
And the one thing I never prepare for is wearing rain pants, and I always just end up with the gross wet thighs feeling.
Yeah.
Ugh, that's nothing worse than that feeling. It's awful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I usually bring them, but I rarely put them on. It's just too much effort.
It does seem like a lot of effort to put on those extra pants, even though I regret it every time I actually get out and start biking.
Totally.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That is Josh Crabb at our CBC News Desk. Well, continuing some chat about the weather. weather. We're going to have a conversation about just how darn rainy it's been lately. But looking ahead, Riley, Lechuk, it seems things actually look kind of dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hot.
And hot.
And I'll say dry, yes. Also humid as we get to the weekend. So, yeah, you might get a bit
okay. Different
moist,
kind of wet. Yeah.
A different kind of wet. A few things happening that I want to talk about today, namely the heat that we're seeing return to Western Canada. Looking at some of the current temperatures in Alberta in particular, 25s already through Edmonton and Calgary at 11:30 in the morning in that neck of the woods right now. 26 in Fort McMurray, even into the mid to high 20s or so through parts of the Northwest Territories. Conversely, 18s for both Dauphin and Winnipeg right now. And we're looking at temperatures really right around 20 degrees here in the south, 13 in Churchill right now, 17 in Thompson. I also want to talk about active weather in parts of southern Ontario. This will impact you, especially if you've got any plans or to head to Ontario, into Toronto in particular, or if you're maybe catching a flight and flying through Pearson, for example. There's been some very heavy rains that have made their way through into parts of the GTA. Heat warning right now for much of Alberta, and I was talking about that rain in parts of southern Ontario. That's sort of moving up through Peterborough into the Ottawa region, but certainly did give a really good soaking this morning, in particular to parts of Toronto, with some flooding in parts of the city and some fairly substantial power outages into the afternoon hours. Here at home, mainly sunny skies here in Winnipeg right now. A few clouds further to the north, maybe a few showers out of some of that right now, particularly through sort of God's Lake, Island Lake, down sort of the eastern side of the province. We are still seeing a few scattered showers into northwestern Ontario as well. That will clear out as we get through the rest of the day today. And then we're kind of under the influence of high pressure as we get into Wednesday. And Corey, that means mainly sunny skies, and I really don't have a lot to talk about once we get through Wednesday, through Thursday, through Friday, other than the temperatures are really going to start heating up here in Manitoba again. This all thanks to a ridge of high pressure that has started to build through the Alberta into parts of British Columbia, the BC interior, which will warm our temperatures up as we get later into the work week and into the weekend in particular. So today looking at around 20 degrees or so through southern Manitoba, maybe a bit cooler up through, say, Gimli into Barons River, looking at 17s and 18s this afternoon. Thompson, 21 today, partly cloudy skies, 24 in Winnipeg tomorrow, 28 for Thursday, 29, 30, 31 as we head into Sunday, and the humidity feeling closer to 40 once again through the weekend.
Well, thank you very much, Riley.
No problem.
That is our weather and climate change reporter, Riley Lechuk. Well, we're just about to have our call-in conversation, but before we do, we actually want to play one call for you. Last hour, we had Transport and Infrastructure Minister Lisa Naylor on the show to talk about the proposed or the changes that they're looking into for the intersection of Highway 5 and Trans-Canada. And tonight in Carberry, they're going to be holding discussions about what those changes should look like. We asked you, the listeners, to give us a call and about what you think should change at that intersection, and we got this call.
Hi, this is Robert Smith. I live out here, farmer in the area, 23 miles from the intersection. I know people who have had accidents at the intersection. I believe there is another alternative besides the ones mentioned. If one was to complete the service roads on the north side of the highway, you could close the intersection and move half the traffic to the east intersection, a mile to the east, and half the traffic to the west intersection, and greatly reduce the chance of any collision. Also, the mile to the east and the mile to the west have longer spaces between the two highways and would function a better service, especially when you're having semis pulling 253-foot trailers where there's not near enough room. I believe it's a viable alternative.
Thank you very much for that call, Robert. If you If you still have other thoughts, we're more than happy to hear your calls. Maybe we'll squeeze them in later at the end of the show, or even into tomorrow. Why not? This is an ongoing conversation we want to keep having because safety on our highways is top of mind at all times. You can give us a call. 204-788-3797 is our listener line. That's 204-788-3797. But we want to keep calls coming for a totally different discussion because there has been a lot of rain lately. At least it seems like it, and that's what the kind of conversation we want to have. I got a bit of an anecdote here. If you've gone outside any time these past few months, it's just a good chance you've learned to bring a raincoat just in case. And it really does seem like it's been rainy more days than not. In my experience, I was actually camping a few weeks ago at Spruce Woods, where we got not one, but 2 torrential thunderstorms in one day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. We had like a 3-hour break in between. After the first one, our tent was actually entirely surrounded by shin deep water. And luckily, we actually had a good tent, so none of the water actually got in. But when we actually opened up the zipper kind of from the top to peek inside, the bottom of our tent actually looked like a waterbed. It was bobbing, like our sleeping bags and pillows were bobbing on top of the water. We did move it to higher ground, but this is the first time, at least I personally have ever experienced a rainy weekend like this camping. I never really had to worry so much about keeping my tent dry. On the upside, my toddler's never had more fun puddles to splash in. So we want to know, how has this rainy weather impacted you, your yard, your business, your farm, your crops, your weekend plans? Give us a call, share your story, or share your concerns about this rain. We want to hear it. Funny stories, not so funny stories. Give us a call. Our phone lines are open. Our director, Wendy, is standing by. You can call us 204-780-0893. That's 204-780-0893. You can also text us, and we'll read it out on air. 204-588-7355. That's 204-588-7355. And to help us understand what's been going on, we've reached Scott Kaler, who's president and chief scientist at WeatherLogix. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon.
So just to put some context, because it's really hard to know if it's just maybe I just don't remember if there's been something like this, maybe in my lifetime, but how unusual of a summer has this been weather-wise so far?
Well, it's definitely been a wetter than normal summer. If we look back all the way to April, every month since April has had more rain than normal. So that part is a little bit unusual, but just in the context of history, so far we're not really seeing a weather pattern that's outside of Manitoba's normal range of summers. We have some years that tend to be drier. We've had a lot of those in the recent past. But if you look back, some folks might remember some summers like 2004 and 2005 that were kind of like this one in many ways. Lots of rain, and that produced a lot of mosquitoes too.
That is certainly true. Are there certain parts of the province that have gotten more rain than others? Is there one that's gotten hit particularly hard?
Well, just generally in southern Manitoba, pretty much the entire southern tier of the province has seen a lot of rain. There are definitely pockets that have been more and others that have been less, but by and large, all of southern Manitoba has seen more rain than normal. And if you go up north, there's also been wet pockets up there as well, but it's such a big province that you can never say that one type of weather is affecting every corner.
I keep wondering, when you see this kind of stuff, I mean, like you said, this is kind of within it's above average for Manitoba in general, but this is the range of, we have seen these kind of rains before. How much of this wet weather, when you see it, can we attribute to climate change, or is it kind of hard to tell while it's happening?
From what I've seen, at least, I wouldn't attribute anything in particular to climate change. There's a certain science now, which we call attribution, which tries to say how much more likely a certain weather event was as a result of climate change. But when I look at the rain we've had in Manitoba, we really haven't seen few, if any, records. And so that tells me that while this has been wetter than normal, it's not really outside of what typically Manitoba receives as far as weather goes. And so climate change wouldn't have a significant impact from what I've seen on this summer so far.
Is predicting the weather, you find, getting harder, easier? Like you said, climate change is a tough thing to kind of pin, but for yourself, well, what are you noticing in terms of the work it takes to actually predict what's going on?
Well, there's kind of two sides to it. So on the one side, we do have the influence of climate change, which makes extreme weather events a bit more likely. And whenever a meteorologist is trying to predict weather, we're always a bit cautious about predicting an extreme event, just because by definition, extreme things are unlikely. But then on the other hand, we also have a lot of new technology, better computer modeling, and better simulations of weather far more data than ever, which makes it easier to predict weather because of all those new tools. So there's both sides to it. I would say overall, probably getting a bit easier due to all the new technologies that we have, but those extreme events definitely come into play more often.
I'm sure a lot of people are curious about what's ahead. We did just hear from Riley Leitchik about kind of the shorter term, more dry forecast. But did you kind of have any idea of what's in store longer term for the rest of the summer in terms of weather?
Well, at WeatherLogic, since all the way back in January, we've been predicting a wet summer, and it looks like that's going to continue to be the trend. We are moving into a bit of a drier spell now, although I would caution that while it will be dry kind of broadly, there's going to be more risks of thunderstorms coming up with this hot pattern, and so that can produce a lot of rain on a really localized basis. But beyond those pockets of heavy rain from storms, it will be fairly dry. I think we'll start to see, a little bit more moisture return across the board into August, but probably a lot of the big weather systems, the Colorado low type systems, probably are mostly done now. We don't tend to see a lot of those in the middle of summer, but then as we go into fall, that may change again. So in kind of the short to medium term, we'll be looking at more isolated pockets of heavy rain due to all the thunderstorm activity in this hot, humid pattern.
I know a lot of your clients are farmers. Is there like a large deluge of questions that you're getting from them these days? Have you noticed a trend in terms of what they're hoping to see at least?
Well, I think a lot of them are actually excited to hear that the pattern is starting to dry out, as it's been such a whiplash of a year for weather when it comes to farming. We started the year with big time moisture concerns, and in the opposite direction, farmers were worried that there wouldn't be enough moisture to grow a crop this year, but that changed almost on a dime this spring. And now a lot of fields have excess moisture, and it's been very challenging for some folks to actually get out there and do what they need to do to keep the crops healthy, especially with the extra disease pressure from this wet and humid weather. So I think a lot of farmers are hoping for a little bit of drying now and then just more kind of timely, lighter rains through the rest of the growing season.
Well, Scott, thanks a lot for joining us to kind of help us make sense of this a little bit, and all the best with the rest of the season for you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too. Scott Kaler is president and chief scientist at WeatherLogics. The time now is 12:46. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. I'm Corey Funk in for Janet Stewart, and we got some time for a bit of music here. Jason Haywood hasn't released any solo music since 2018, and that's when his album Folklore won him a Music New Brunswick Award for Traditional Roots Artist of the Year. Well, now Jason's put together a new backing band called The Gold Rush, and they've shared a new single ahead of the new album. This is Jason Haywood and The Gold Rush with Stay a While. You're hearing it right here on CBC Radio 1.
Looking at all the pictures hung up on the bedroom wall. Well, the Queen Anne's lace covered up her face, photographed by the Union Hall. Don't get caught up in the pleasure, it will only come to pain. She was running out of chances at a bus stop in the rain. Stay just a little while longer. Came every time you'd call. Stay just a little while longer. There's still so far to fall. Can your courage endure? Will your hands be strong on twilight's winding road? No one can save you but yourself. You can always pick up the phone. Stay just a little while longer. Came every time you call. Stay just a little while longer. case full of pictures of the past. Shed a tear for a time and place. This one won't be your last. Stay just a little while longer. Came every time you'd call. Stay just a little while longer. There's still so far to fall.
That's Jason Haywood and the Gold Rush with Stay a While. Look out for their new album coming out this September. Well, 12:50 right now. And how about a little music quiz for you here? So here's a little riddle. They broke up more than 50 years ago, but they're still one of the most popular bands in the world. And let's be serious, you probably know the answer. It's the Beatles. And a new exhibit at the National Music Centre in Calgary explores how Canadian Beatlemania was already in full swing even before the Beatles ever toured the U.S. And CBC's Chris Delator headed down to the NMC and met with the exhibit's creator.
My name is Piers Hemmingson. I'm the guest curator for this National Music Centre exhibit titled From Me to You, The Beatles in Canada, 1964 to 1966. The Beatles have an incredible story. The Beatles story is a global story, and Canada had a very important part to play in the Beatles' complete story. So I think in this exhibit, what we're trying to tell people is that, yeah, Canada was there at the beginning. I try to answer the question, why did Canada get the Beatles before, let's say, the United States and Ed Sullivan? So Canada had the Beatles in 1963 when nobody wanted to know in the United States. So that is part of the story we're telling here.
Yeah. Live from New York, the Ed Sullivan Show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
You mentioned that Ed Sullivan performance. Folks born many years later know exactly what that is. They've probably seen footage of it, and people think of that moment in February of '64 as like the thing that really kick-started Beatlemania in the States. So what happened here in Canada that gave the Beatles a connection before that?
So Canada back in sort of the late 50s, early 60s was still part of the Commonwealth when the Commonwealth was a thing. And there was a lot of transatlantic movement of kids, families back and forth across the ocean. In my case, my family, we were living in Canada. We went over to England for a couple of years. My father was an instructor at the Royal Artillery School in England, so we were there to see the Beatles start out. It's not just our family, but many other kids back and forth. We tell the story in the exhibit about Trudy Metcalf, who founded a fan club in Ontario. It was the first fan club there. And when the Beatles came to play on Ed Sullivan, there was no U.S. fan club. They flew Trudy and her next-door neighbor, Don Hester, to New York City, and they hung out with the Beatles. You'll see pictures of them with the Beatles up there, sorting fan mail with Paul McCartney. The Beatles loved their fan clubs. John Lennon got down on his hands and knees to thank Trudy and her partner. Trudy tells the story in the video here. Canada had the first Beatles single in North America, the first Beatles album in North America. Sandy Gardner, pictured over there, he was a journalist who wrote the first review of a Beatles record for the Ottawa Journal in March of 1963. So there was a slow and steady build-up. And then the Beatles were number one in Canada just before the middle of December 1963. So a few months before they set foot on the stage of Ed Sullivan's show.
How do you like the new threads? Tough! I didn't know you were a Beatle fan, Grandma. Dig the Beatles?
We're standing in front of something called the Beatle Bar. Could you tell us about what this is?
Sure. In 1964, the complete peak of Beatlemania was probably before the Beatles actually performed live in Canada, in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal. But Eaton's department store, they were huge across Canada. Every major city had an Eaton's, and they had something in their department stores called a Beatle Bar.
Yeah.
And inside the Beatle Bar, you could buy all the Beatles merchandise, spend every penny you had on sneakers, on a wallet, on dolls, on shirts, pennants, and jewelry. But if you were a Beatles fan, you went to the Beatle Bar and you probably spent every penny you had.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's Piers Hemmingson. He's a music historian and author of the book The Beatles in Canada. He's the guest curator of From Me to You, The Beatles in Canada, 1964 to 1966. It's at the National Music Centre in Calgary until January. We have to play a little bit of Beatles for you. And why not celebrate the sun coming out after this kind of rainy period we've had a couple of months. Here's the Beatles with Here Comes the Sun.
Comes the sun, here comes the sun, I say it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, I say it's alright. Little darling, the smile's returning to the faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, I say it's alright. Sun, 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 here it comes. 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 Little darling, I feel that ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun. Here comes the
That's the Beatles. It's the Beatles. Do we need to introduce the Beatles anymore? You just know. It's the Beatles, of course, though. Because you don't know, it's the Beatles with Here Comes the Sun. And speaking of sunny folks, here in the studio with me is Chloe Friesen. She's hosting Up to Speed this afternoon from 3 to 6. And what you got in store for the show?
Well, first I got to know, who was that?
What the?
Who was the band?
Oh,
that you just...
it's a bug. I'm trying to remember what they're called again.
Yeah.
The cockroaches.
Pretty unknown. I don't know. Some indie stuff right there.
Yeah, I know, right? Up and coming.
Up and coming. Coming up on Up to Speed, there's new research. It's looking at the amount of funding it takes to get high-performance athletes to the Olympic podium, specifically Canadian athletes, and it's arguing that governments should actually shift their priority to getting regular people participating in sport.
Okay.
So we will learn more about that on Up to Speed. Those Olympics less than 2 weeks away.
Wild.
Coming up soon.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chloe.
No problem.
That's Chloe Friesen. She's sitting in the host chair from 3 to 6 today on Up to Speed. Well, that is a wrap for Radio New. Thanks to everyone who helped put together today's show. Dylan Longhurst, Wendy Parker, Nellie Gonzalez, and Leif Larson. I'm Corey Funk, in for Janet Stewart all this week. Thanks for having me by. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. Coming up next, Unreserved, and they'll be talking about the TV series filmed in Winnipeg and Ojibwe First Nation. Stay tuned for that.